That's brilliant, Dean, the CEO said, clapping slowly. Your presentation just saved this quarter. My hand stopped mid-scribble. His presentation? The slides glowing on the boardroom screen were mine, my strategy, my data, my sleepless nights. And there he was, my director, standing at the front of the glass-walled conference room, smiling like the hero of a story he didn't write. He didn't even glance at me as he said, "Gwen, take notes, would you?" Laughter rippled through the room. Then softer, under his breath where only I could hear it, "Take notes, not credit." Something in me broke that day. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, internal snap. The kind that changes everything. That was the day Dean Whitmore stole my work in front of the entire executive board. And it was also the day I promised myself he'd never do it again. Not to me. Not to anyone. My name is Gwen Cole, and this is how I took everything from him. 2 years earlier, everything was different. I walked into Brightwell Marketing on my first day wearing my best blazer and carrying hope like a shield. Dean Whitmore shook my hand with that $1 million smile. "Welcome aboard, Gwen. We're going to do great things together." I believed him completely. He seemed brilliant then, charming, confident, the kind of mentor every new hire dreams about. He'd stay late helping me understand client accounts. He'd praise my ideas in team meetings. "Gwen's my right hand," he'd tell people, and I'd feel 10 feet tall. I worked harder for him than I'd ever worked for anyone. Late nights turned into early mornings. Weekends disappeared into spreadsheets. Every idea I had, every strategy one developed, I handed over freely. I thought loyalty meant protection. I thought hard work guaranteed recognition. I was so incredibly wrong about both. The first betrayal came 6 months in. I'd spent 3 weeks developing a social media campaign for our biggest client. It was innovative, risky, exactly what they needed. I sent Dean the final presentation on a Thursday night. On Friday morning, he presented it to the client. His name was on every slide. Mine appeared once, in tiny letters at the bottom, with thanks to the team. I cornered him after the meeting. "Dean, that was my campaign. Why wasn't my name on it?" He smiled that easy smile. "Relax, Gwen. Clients want to hear from leadership. You'll get your turn." His hand landed on my shoulder like a weight. "Besides, we're a team, right? Your success is my success." I nodded because what else could I do? But something small and cold settled in my chest that day. That turn he promised? It never came. Instead, I learned his real rule: he only promoted people who didn't threaten him. The pattern repeated itself over months. My client retention strategy became Dean's innovative approach. My data analysis framework turned into the director's insight. Every achievement I built, he claimed. Every late night I worked, he took credit for. The worst part? Everyone believed him. He had that gift, making lies sound like truth, making theft look like leadership. At the quarterly all-hands meeting, my work flashed on the screen again. Dean stood at the podium, calling it a team effort I'm proud to have led. The VP of Operations congratulated him personally. "Thanks," Dean said, his voice humble. "I really pushed the team hard on this one." No mention of me. No acknowledgement of the 60-hour weeks. I sat in the back row, smiling because that's what you do when you're powerless. I could feel 20 pairs of eyes on me, some pitying, some smug, all seeing exactly what was happening. I tried the proper channels. I really did. I went to HR twice, documented everything, explained calmly how Dean was taking credit for my work. The HR manager, Patricia, nodded sympathetically. She made notes on her tablet, promised to look into it thoroughly. 2 days later, Dean called me into his office. He closed the door, sat on the edge of his desk, arms crossed. "Patricia mentioned you had some concerns." His voice was soft, dangerous. "Next time you're upset about something, talk to me first, not HR. We're a team, remember? The way he said it made my skin crawl. It wasn't advice, it was a warning. I understood then that the system wouldn't save me. Dean was too important, too charming, too connected. If I wanted justice, I'd have to create it myself. But first, I had to be smarter. I had to stop fighting loudly and start watching quietly. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Dean called me into his office for what he called a role adjustment. Adjustment meant demotion. I was being moved from lead strategist to executive assistant. My projects would be redistributed. My meetings would become his meetings. You'll still be involved, he assured me, reorganizing papers on his desk. Just in a support capacity. Support meant taking notes while others presented my ideas. It meant scheduling his appointments and fetching his coffee. It meant being invisible. That morning, I'd seen my latest project proposal on his desk, a complete rebrand strategy I'd spent 2 months developing. My name was nowhere on it. His name filled the header. He was going to present it as his own. Again. I walked out of his office with my head high and my heart dead. Something fundamental shifted inside me that day. I stopped wanting to be heard. I started planning to be free. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a bottle of wine I didn't drink and a notebook I filled with rage and strategy. At the top of the page, I wrote 3 questions. What does he control? What can I control? What can I prove? Under his control, my title, my projects, my visibility. Under my control, my skills, my documentation, my patience. Under proof, I wrote 1 word and underlined it 3 times, everything. I would document everything. Every email, every file version, every conversation. I would build a case so airtight that even his charm couldn't slip through the cracks. I would become indispensable while gathering evidence of his theft. And when the moment came, I would take everything he'd stolen from me, and more. The plan felt cold, calculated, nothing like the hopeful person I'd been 2 years ago. But that person was gone. She'd been killed by 1,000 small humiliations. I started the next morning. Every email I sent, I blind copied myself on a personal account. Every file I created, I saved with timestamps to a cloud drive Dean couldn't access. After meetings, I recorded voice memos summarizing what was discussed and who contributed what ideas. Dean never noticed. Why would he? I was just his assistant now, quiet and obedient, taking notes like he'd told me to. He liked me better this way, non-threatening, controllable. He'd pass by my desk and say things like, "See? Isn't this easier, or you seem much happier now?" I'd smile and nod, and inside I'd add another nail to the coffin I was building for him. The funny thing about being underestimated is how invisible it makes you. People stop watching what you do. They stop guarding their words around you. Dean told me things he should never have told an enemy. And I was absolutely his enemy now. 3 weeks into my documentation project, something unexpected happened. Maya Torres, a senior analyst I barely knew, stopped by my desk after a client presentation. She waited until Dean left the room, then leaned close. "You made that deck, didn't you?" Her voice was barely a whisper. I kept my face neutral. "I don't know what you mean." She pulled a USB drive from her pocket and placed it on my desk, covering it with her hand. "I've been here 5 years. I've watched him do this to 3 other people. You're not crazy, and you're not alone." She walked away before I could respond. That night, I opened the USB. Inside were folders labeled with names I didn't recognize, former employees, I assumed. Each folder contained the same pattern: original work, stolen presentations, documentation of Dean's theft. Maya had been collecting evidence for years. She'd watched Dean destroy careers and documented every theft. Now she was handing me her ammunition. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. Dean's charm was his greatest weapon. He brought in coffee for the team every Monday. He remembered birthdays, asked about people's kids, stayed late to help junior employees with their projects. Everyone loved him. At company events, he was the center of attention, telling stories that made people laugh until they cried. But behind closed doors, he was someone else entirely. He'd call me into his office and close the blinds. "You're replaceable, Gwen." "Smart, sure, but not irreplaceable. There are 100 people who'd kill for your job." He'd say it casually, like commenting on the weather. "Remember that before you get any ideas about going over my head again." I'd nod and leave, my hands shaking. But every threat he made, I recorded. Every cruel comment, I documented. He thought he was breaking me down. He didn't realize he was giving me exactly what I needed to break him instead. 6 months after my demotion, Dean got promoted. The announcement came during a surprise celebration the CEO organized. Dean was now Executive Director of Marketing, the youngest person to ever hold that position at Brightwell. He gave a speech about teamwork and dedication. "I couldn't have done this without my incredible team," he said, his voice full of fake humility. "Especially my assistant, Gwen, who keeps everything running smoothly." Assistant. Not strategist, not the person who'd built half his portfolio. Assistant. Everyone clapped. Some people glanced at me with pity. I smiled and clapped too, my hands moving mechanically while my mind calculated. His new office had glass walls. His new position came with more scrutiny. His new responsibilities required skills he'd never actually developed because he'd always stolen the work of people who had them. This promotion would be his downfall. I just had to be patient and let him climb high enough that the fall would destroy him completely. While Dean celebrated his promotion with expensive dinners and self-congratulation, I went to work. I enrolled in online leadership courses, strategy, management, corporate communication. I read every case study I could find about marketing turnarounds. I studied the skills Dean should have had but didn't. If he was going to be the face of the department, I'd make myself the brain. The one who understood every system, every client relationship, every strategic framework. The indispensable one. I built processes he didn't understand but couldn't function without. I created tracking systems that only I knew how to interpret. I made myself the answer to every question his new position would ask. When people needed something, they stopped going to Dean. They came to me because I actually knew how things worked. Dean didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying his new title, his new salary, his new corner office. He never saw me building the scaffolding that held up his career, or the demolition charges I was hiding inside it. The first crack appeared during the Maxwell account review. Dean had promised aggressive growth targets without understanding the client's budget constraints. When the numbers didn't match, he panicked. He called me at midnight. "Fix this, Gwen." "I don't care how." I fixed it by working through the night, adjusting projections, finding cost savings Dean had overlooked because he'd never actually read the contract. In the morning, Dean presented his solution to the executive team. But this time, something was different. The VP of Finance, Thomas Brennan, frowned during the presentation. "These numbers look familiar. Didn't Gwen send me a similar analysis last night?" Dean froze for half a second. "She was helping me prepare. Team effort, you know." Thomas's expression didn't change, but I saw it, the smallest flash of doubt. A seed planted. Dean smoothed it over with charm and confidence. But after the meeting, Thomas stopped by my desk. "Good work on those projections." Just 3 words, but they mattered. Someone was finally seeing through the performance. 2 months later, Dean announced the biggest campaign in company history. He called an emergency meeting, his excitement filling the conference room. "I've been working on something revolutionary," he said, clicking through slides. "A complete 3-year growth strategy that will double our market share." I watched my stolen work flash across the screen. Every chart, every tactical approach, every innovative framework, all mine. He'd found my strategy plan on the shared drive and copied it word for word, just changing the name on top. The executives were impressed. The CEO called it visionary thinking. Dean soaked up the praise like sunshine. But he'd made a critical mistake. This strategy was complex, built on months of research and analysis. He'd memorized the presentation, but he didn't understand the underlying logic. And I knew that sooner or later, someone would ask him a question he couldn't answer. I just had to make sure that happened at exactly the right moment. Before Dean's big presentation to the board, I did something subtle. I sent an email to the CEO's executive assistant, Victoria. Hi Victoria, I'm organizing files for the quarterly review. I'm attaching some reference materials for the growth strategy presentation, original drafts and research notes that might be helpful for the board's records. No accusations. No claims of ownership. Just helpful documentation. The email included my original files, complete with creation dates, revision history, and my name on every document. Victoria thanked me for being so thorough and proactive. I knew she'd forward it to the CEO as background material. I knew he'd see the dates, the authorship, the fact that every idea Dean would present existed in my files months before Dean ever mentioned them. Paper trails are powerful weapons when planted with patience. And I'd learned to be very, very patient. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for Dean to walk into it. Dean's presentation day arrived. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. I watched him pace outside the conference room, running through his memorized lines. He looked nervous, which was unusual. Confidence was usually his strongest mask. The presentation started smoothly. Dean had the first 10 slides memorized perfectly. But then came the questions. How do you plan to scale the customer acquisition strategy? A board member asked. Dean fumbled. Well, we'll implement aggressive tactics. Such as? Dean looked at his notes. The answer wasn't there because he'd never written this strategy. I had. We're still finalizing the tactical details. Another board member jumped in. The projection models show a significant investment in Q3. What's driving that? Silence. Dean's face went red. Market expansion initiatives. Which market specifically? More silence. I watched from my seat in the back as Dean's perfect presentation crumbled into vague non-answers and obvious gaps in understanding. The CEO's face grew cold. The board members exchanged glances. After the meeting, Dean exploded. He cornered me in the hallway, his voice echoing off the walls. You sabotaged me. You changed the files, didn't you? Everyone in the department could hear him. People stopped working, watching through office windows. I kept my voice calm, quiet. I didn't change anything. You asked me to take notes, remember? Not responsibility. His face went purple. Don't play innocent with me. You did something. I organized files for the board's reference. That's my job as your assistant, isn't it? The silence that followed was crushing. Half the office had heard him yell at me. They'd also heard me calmly defending myself. Someone's phone was probably recording. Dean realized his mistake too late. He stormed back to his office and slammed the door. I returned to my desk, hands steady, heart racing. The walls were closing in on him, and he could feel it. Now came the final moves. That evening, I sent an email. The subject line read, Clarification on project ownership and timeline concerns. I addressed it to the CEO, the VP of Operations, and the head of legal. The email was calm, professional, emotionless. Dear executives, following today's presentation and some confusion about project timelines, I'm providing documentation for clarity and record-keeping purposes. Attached are original files, drafts, and correspondence showing the development timeline of our current growth strategy. I want to ensure proper attribution and transparency as we move forward. Please let me know if you need any additional information. Attached were 50 documents. Every email where I'd sent Dean my ideas. Every file showing I'd created the strategy. Every timestamp proving the work was mine. I didn't accuse Dean of anything. I didn't have to. The evidence screamed louder than any accusation could. I hit send and closed my laptop. There was no going back now. The truth was in motion, and nothing could stop it. The internal review started 3 days later. It was framed as a routine audit of project management practices, but everyone knew what it really was. HR and legal started pulling files, interviewing team members, reconstructing timelines. Dean was called in twice in the first week. He came out both times looking shaken, his usual confidence cracking. Maya stopped by my desk. They're looking at everything. For years of his projects. She smiled slightly. That USB I gave you? I forwarded it to legal too. Anonymous tip. The investigation grew. Other team members started coming forward with their own stories of stolen work. Dean wasn't just a thief, he was a pattern. A system of exploitation that had been running for years. The company couldn't ignore it anymore. Their rising star was being exposed as a fraud, and the evidence was overwhelming. My documentation had been the spark, but the fire was spreading on its own now. Dean had burned too many people. Dean's charm disappeared like morning fog. His jokes at meetings fell flat. His attempts at casual conversation were met with cold politeness. People stopped including him in lunch plans. The invitations to after-work drinks dried up. I watched him become isolated, watched the social capital he'd built crumble. One afternoon, he appeared at my desk. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie loose. Gwen, did you say something? To HR, to anyone? I met his gaze without blinking. I'm just taking notes, Dean. Like you told me to. His hands gripped the edge of my desk. This isn't funny. No, I agreed quietly. It isn't. It never was. He walked away without another word. I returned to my spreadsheet, my finger steady on the keyboard. Everything was falling into place exactly as I'd planned. The hard part, the waiting, the documenting, the patience, was over. Now came the satisfaction of watching justice arrive right on schedule. The call started on a Monday morning. Dean was summoned to HR first. He was in there for 90 minutes. Then legal. Another hour. Finally, he was called to the CEO's office. The blinds closed. Through the glass walls, I could see silhouettes, Dean sitting, the CEO standing, papers being pushed across the desk. 37 minutes later, the door opened. Dean walked out carrying a cardboard box. His face was gray, his movements mechanical. He didn't look at anyone as he walked past my desk, past the department he'd ruled for years, past the corner office that had been his kingdom. Security walked him to the parking garage. He was gone within an hour. No farewell email. No goodbye party. Just gone, like he'd never existed. Except he had existed, and he'd hurt people, and now he was facing the consequences. I felt no joy watching him leave. Just a quiet, settling peace. The weight I'd been carrying for 2 years finally lifted from my shoulders. 2 days later, I was called into the CEO's office. My heart hammered despite knowing I'd done nothing wrong. The CEO, Marcus Whitfield, gestured to a chair. Gwen, we need to talk about the department. He looked tired. Dean's departure has left a significant gap. We need stability, and we need it fast. He pulled out my documentation, the files I'd sent, the evidence I'd compiled. Your work here is exceptional. Your knowledge of our systems is unmatched. And your integrity during this whole situation has been remarkable. He paused. We'd like you to take over as interim director while we conduct a formal search. Interim. The word felt careful, non-committal. But it was a door opening. I'd be honored, I said, keeping my voice professional. Inside, fireworks were exploding. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. 2 years of humiliation, documentation, and strategic patience had led to this moment. The first real recognition of my worth. The formal search lasted 6 weeks. I was interviewed 3 times, along with 5 external candidates. I presented my vision for the department, outlined my strategies for growth, demonstrated my knowledge of every system and client relationship. The board deliberated for a week. On a cold Friday in March, Marcus called me into his office again. "Gwen, the board has reviewed all candidates thoroughly." My heart stopped. "We'd like to offer you the permanent position of Director of Marketing." I felt my eyes burn with tears I refused to let fall. "We've reviewed your work history here extensively," Marcus continued. "The growth strategies, the client retention frameworks, the data systems, they're all exceptional. We should have recognized your contributions years ago. That's on us." He extended his hand. "Congratulations, Director Cole." I shook his hand, my voice steady despite the emotion flooding through me. "Thank you. I won't let you down." I wouldn't. Because this wasn't just a job anymore. It was vindication. It was justice. It was proof that talent and persistence could outlast theft and charm. Moving into the corner office felt surreal. Dean's nameplate was gone from the door, replaced by one that read Gwen Cole, Director of Marketing. The space still smelled faintly of his cologne, but I opened the windows and let fresh air sweep through. I rearranged the furniture, putting my own mark on the room. The desk where he'd plotted his thefts was now mine. The windows overlooking the city were now mine. The authority, the respect, the recognition, all mine, and earned through merit rather than manipulation. On the desk, I placed a new leather notebook. On the first page, I wrote 4 words, "Take notes." Not credit. It was a reminder of where I'd come from, what I'd overcome. A reminder that success built on stolen work eventually collapses. And a promise to myself that I'd never let anyone steal from my team the way Dean had stolen from me. This office, this title, this position, they weren't just victory. They were responsibility. 3 weeks into my new role, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender, Dean Whitmore. The subject line was empty. The message contained just 2 words, "You won." I stared at it for a long time, my finger hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to respond, to explain that this wasn't about winning, it was about justice. That I'd only taken what he'd tried to steal from me. That he'd destroyed himself through his own actions. But in the end, I deleted the email without responding. He didn't deserve my words, my energy, or my attention. He'd taken enough from me already. I wouldn't give him anything more. I turned back to my computer, to the strategy deck I was building for our next board presentation. This one would have my name on it. This one would be presented by me. And every future success, every achievement, every innovation would be credited to the person who actually created it. Because I hadn't just won Dean's title and office. I'd reclaimed something far more valuable, my voice, my worth, and my future. And in this corner office, the only notes I took were of my own victories.